Have you ever wondered what it feels like when your entire world collapses in a single moment? When the man who promised to love you forever strips away everything you thought you were? Well, I'm about to tell you exactly how that feels, and more importantly, how I turned the most devastating betrayal of my life into the most powerful revenge story you'll ever hear. My name is Sophia Hartfield, and 3 months ago, I was digging through a dumpster behind a boarded-up mansion when a woman in an immaculate designer suit appeared. She stopped a few feet away and asked, "Are you Sophia Hartfield?" I froze, clutching a broken antique chair leg, my hands coated in grime, while my ex-husband's cruel words echoed in my head. "No one wants a penniless, homeless woman like you." I'd laughed back then, but now, standing knee-deep in discarded furniture at sunrise, I could almost hear Richard mocking me for scavenging treasures like some desperate vagrant. I pulled myself out of that dumpster and brushed the filth from my jeans. "That's me," I said. "If you're here to collect payment, all I've got is this chair leg." Her lips curved slightly. "I'm Victoria Chen, attorney for the estate of Theodore Hartfield." My chest tightened. Uncle Theodore, the man who took me in after my parents' accident, who nurtured my passion for architecture, and who turned his back on me when I chose love over my career a decade ago. "Your great-uncle passed 6 weeks ago," Victoria continued evenly. "He named you sole beneficiary of his entire estate." My world went still. If you're watching this right now, tell me where you're tuning in from and hit that like and subscribe button if you've ever hit rock bottom just before life handed you something unbelievable, because you'll want to hear how this story unfolds. Only 3 months earlier, I'd still been comfortably middle class with a husband, a home, and an unused architecture degree. Richard insisted I didn't need to work. "I earn enough for both of us," he'd say. Not out of love, but control. When I found out about his affair with his secretary, everything collapsed overnight. The divorce was vicious. Richard had the best attorneys money could buy. I had legal aid and desperation. He walked away with the house, the cars, and the savings. I walked away with a single suitcase and the bitter truth that our prenup left me nothing. His last words still stung. "Good luck finding someone who wants broken leftovers." Since then, I'd survived by salvaging abandoned furniture, restoring it in a rented storage unit, and selling what I could online. It wasn't glamorous, but it was survival with dignity. Victoria motioned toward a sleek black Mercedes. "Perhaps we can continue this conversation somewhere more comfortable." I stared at my dirt-streaked reflection in the car window. "I'm not exactly dressed for that." "You're the heir to a $50 million estate," she replied with quiet certainty. "The car can survive a little dust. 50 million? The words hung in the air like a second heartbeat. Inside the car, Victoria handed me a folder while the city blurred past. "Your uncle left you his Manhattan home, his Ferrari collection, a portfolio of income properties, and majority ownership of Hartfield architecture. The firm's valuation stands around 47 million. My eyes fixed on the photographs inside, the same brownstone I'd admired years ago in Architectural Digest. "There must be some error," I murmured. "He cut me out of his life a decade ago." Victoria's tone softened. "He never altered his will, Miss Hartfield. But there is one stipulation. You're required to assume the role of CEO at Hartfield Architecture within 30 days and keep the position for a minimum of 1 year. If you decline, the entire inheritance reverts to the American Institute of Architects." A hollow laugh escaped me. I've never practiced a single day as an architect. Graduated at 21, married at 22. My husband thought my degree was some cute pastime. Victoria's gaze met mine. "Your uncle believed you'd eventually find your way back." This was his way of ensuring that. I thought back to when I was 21, in my final year of architecture school. Richard had been 32, confident, magnetic, already established. He'd come to my gallery exhibition where my Sustainable Community Center project had taken first place. Uncle Theodore's pride that night had been unmistakable. "You're going to change the world," Uncle Theodore had told me, his voice full of conviction. "Next year, you'll come work with me at the firm. Together, we'll make history." Richard had overheard that conversation. He'd introduced himself afterward, charming and confident, praising my designs. 6 months later, we were engaged. 2 months after that, married. Uncle Theodore had refused to attend the wedding. "You're making a terrible mistake," he'd warned. That man doesn't want an equal. He wants an ornament. You're building yourself a gilded cage. I'd been indignant, naive, and hopelessly infatuated. You're just envious, I'd snapped. I'm choosing my own life. No, he'd said quietly. I'm devastated because you're abandoning the future you fought for. After that, silence. No returned calls, no answers to my holiday cards. From the start, Richard's control had crept in slowly. First, he suggested I take a break before job hunting. Then, he questioned why I'd bother with the licensing exam. When I began doing small freelance projects, he'd conveniently plan sudden trips, leaving me scrambling until I gave up altogether. Now, sitting in that hotel room, after agreeing to take over the firm, I realized Uncle Theodore had been right about everything. The next morning, Victoria and I flew to New York. When the plane began its descent, the Manhattan skyline glittered beneath the clouds. I'd never been here before. Richard hated big cities, preferred suburbia where everything stayed under his thumb. The Hartfield estate was a 5-story brownstone that commanded attention yet felt warm and familiar. A woman in her 60s greeted me at the front door with a warm smile. Miss Hartfield, I'm Margaret. I worked for your uncle for 3 decades. I also cared for you after your parents passed. Her words stirred something distant in me, the comforting figure who'd made sure I ate when grief hollowed me out. Your uncle's suite is on the 4th floor, Margaret said as she led me up the grand staircase. But the 5th, he remodeled that for you. I stopped mid-step. For me? When? 8 years ago, she said quietly. He never stopped believing you'd come back. The studio took my breath away. Sunlight poured through floor-to-ceiling windows, drafting tables stretched across the room, and pinned on the far wall was my old college exhibition sketch. My throat tightened as I traced the worn edges. He'd kept it all this time. When I arrived at Hartfield Architecture that afternoon, 8 board members sat around a polished table, their faces tight with skepticism. A man named Carmichael leaned back with open disdain. With all due respect, Miss Hartfield has 0 experience in practice. Actually, Mr. 12. Carmichael, I said evenly. My uncle understood this firm needed renewal, not more nostalgia from people protecting their comfort zones. I placed one of my notebooks on the table. This is a concept for a sustainable mixed-use project I designed 3 years ago. I have 16 more volumes like this. 10 years of design work done quietly because my husband called architecture a hobby. Several board members leaned closer, curiosity flickering in their eyes. I looked around the room, meeting each skeptical stare. If anyone here prefers staying stagnant instead of evolving, the door's open. This firm was built on vision, and that's exactly what I intend to restore. The next week felt like diving headfirst into a world I'd once only studied. Jacob Sterling, senior partner, walked me through everything. For the first time in years, I felt like I belonged somewhere. But Carmichael wasn't finished. He sent an all-staff email demanding board approval for all design decisions. Without hesitation, I hit reply all. This policy is declined. Hartfield Architecture thrives on trust in our designer's judgment. When Carmichael demanded a private meeting, I agreed on the condition that Jacob be present. Your uncle left me 30% ownership, he said stiffly. I won't stand by while you dismantle it. I leaned back in Theodore's chair, calm but firm. My uncle left me controlling interest. You can collaborate or resist, but if you choose the latter, you'll lose. My first major client pitch was the Anderson Project, a Seattle headquarters that needed to be revolutionary and sustainable. For 3 weeks, I'd refined every detail. But when I arrived for the presentation, my laptop was missing. Carmichael appeared, holding it casually. Found it in the break room. Must have been misplaced. I powered it up only to discover the file was corrupted, slides scrambled, visuals missing. I had 30 seconds to choose. Panic, postpone, or adapt. I heard Theodore's voice in memory. Spectacular failure is better than safe mediocrity. I smiled and shut the laptop. Actually, let's try something different. I walked to the whiteboard and began sketching, my hand moving instinctively. A decade of study and quiet rebellion poured out in confident lines. This, I said, drawing the structure's silhouette, is a headquarters inspired by its surroundings. The building interacts with the land rather than dominating it. By the time I capped the final marker 45 minutes later, the whiteboard had become a living mural of my design. Anderson rose from his seat, studying the board in silence. This is exactly what I've been looking for. Someone who treats architecture as a living organism. When can you begin? After they left with a signed contract, I called an emergency board meeting. My presentation files were intentionally damaged to sabotage my credibility, I said evenly. The data manipulation originated from Carmichael's workstation. His mask slipped. I was testing her, he snapped. Theodore handed this company to an unproven amateur. I laughed softly. You think a few broken files will break me? You didn't test me. You exposed yourself. By the next morning, Carmichael's resignation letter arrived. 2 weeks later, Margaret appeared in my office holding Theodore's personal journal. The pages were yellowed, filled with precise handwriting spanning 15 years. My throat tightened as I reached the section about my marriage. Sophia married Richard Foster today. I refused to go. I can't watch someone I love walk willingly into a cage. Entry after entry revealed his quiet vigil, tracking my fading light, preparing the studio as an act of faith, waiting for me to choose freedom myself. The final entry, written weeks before his death. Sophia filed for divorce. Thank God. She's stronger than she's ever realized. The rest is up to her. I sat motionless, tears blurring the ink. Every page was proof of a love that never wavered. That night, Jacob came to the estate. I handed him the journal, and after reading every word, he looked at me carefully. Theodore asked me to guide you, he admitted. But I stopped doing this for Theodore weeks ago. Every day I watch you become more yourself. That's not obligation, that's admiration. And if I'm honest, it's more than admiration. Something stirred in me that I hadn't allowed myself to feel in years. 3 months after I took over, the Hartfield Fellowship launched 12 spots for underrepresented architecture students. Emma Rodriguez, designing homeless shelters with community gardens, was my first choice. You're not here because of charity, I told the fellows. You're here because you're an investment. The program was rigorous, but by November, Emma's community shelter caught the eye of a Brooklyn nonprofit. When Architectural Digest requested an interview about the fellowship, I said, "This isn't about cheap labor. It's about tearing down barriers that keep talent from thriving." At the company holiday party in December, Jacob asked me to dance. As we moved gently with the rhythm, he murmured, "I'm in love with you." Not falling, already there completely. I'll wait as long as you need. Fear flickered, but stronger was the part of me Theodore had rebuilt. I'm terrified, I admitted. What if I'm not ready? Then we figure it out together, Jacob said softly. I don't want to shape you. I love who you already are. I leaned in and kissed him right there in front of half the company. It was reckless, emotional, real. When we broke apart, the room erupted in applause. In February, Architectural Digest published a full feature chronicling my journey from dumpster diving to leading one of the most prestigious architectural firms in the country. The response was staggering, but visibility has a price. Richard started calling. Then came the texts. Saw the article. Impressive. We should talk. I blocked him immediately, but he wasn't finished. He messaged Emma on LinkedIn, sent letters through his lawyer, and when I refused all contact, he started spreading lies about how I'd manipulated a dying man. But Theodore's old network rallied. One by one, they shared stories of how he'd tracked my life with quiet pride, how he'd believed in my eventual return. The whispers died quickly. Then came the ultimate test. Marcus Chen, CEO of a rival firm, made an acquisition offer, $300 million for Hartfield Architecture. My personal share would exceed $150 million. This is a trap, Jacob warned. Marcus wants to eliminate competition and absorb what makes us unique. I didn't need to think. Theodore didn't build this firm for someone like Marcus to strip it for parts. The answer is no. The board smiled. Patricia handed me another envelope. Theodore anticipated this scenario. He established an additional trust, $30 million, unrestricted, as a reward for understanding that some legacies aren't meant to be sold. Inside was also a small velvet box containing a ring that had belonged to my great-aunt Eleanor, the first woman architect in our family. The note read, She never compromised her vision. This ring belongs to someone worthy of her legacy. Build bravely. That evening, Jacob proposed in the studio Theodore had built for me 8 years before I was ready to return. "Sophia Hartfield," he said softly, "will you marry me?" "Yes," I whispered, the word breaking into a laugh and a sob all at once. Our wedding took place 18 months after I'd climbed out of that dumpster. We married in Theodore's rooftop garden, surrounded by the people who'd seen me rebuild my life piece by piece. Margaret clutched a handkerchief Theodore had left labeled for Sophia's wedding day. But even then, Richard wasn't finished. He filed a lawsuit claiming my architectural education counted as a marital asset he was entitled to share. Victoria countersued for emotional distress and harassment, armed with 10 years of journals documenting his systematic destruction of my confidence. At the preliminary hearing, the judge dismissed Richard's case with prejudice. Outside the courthouse, I told reporters, "My ex-husband spent 10 years convincing me I was worthless." Today, the court confirmed what I've always known. Richard Foster is a small man who can't handle strong women, and I'm done giving him any power over my narrative. The clip went viral. Small Man trended for hours. Other women came forward with their own stories. His business collapsed overnight. Using Theodore's final trust fund, I launched a nationwide public architecture initiative. Libraries, community centers, shelters designed with the same dignity usually reserved for the wealthy. 5 years later, I stood at my alma mater giving the commencement address. From that nothing, I told the graduates, I built everything. Not because I was fearless, but because I was finally willing to be seen as imperfect, to fail, to try again, to grow. Some of the strongest foundations are laid after everything else has fallen apart. A young woman approached afterward, saying my documentary had made her believe she could still build something that mattered. "Then you already have," I told her, "because believing you can build, that's where it all begins." That evening, standing on the rooftop of the Hartfield estate, now a public design hub, Jacob slipped his arm around me. 5 years, he said softly. Can you believe it? I looked at the skyline we'd helped reshape, proof that from the deepest ruins, beauty can rise again. Below us, the city pulsed with light. Museums, shelters, schools, all born from one stubborn architect's refusal to let the world decide her worth. Theodore had given me the rarest kind of gift, the gift of collapse, the kind that teaches you exactly how it feels to stand on solid ground again. You can lose everything, your money, your reputation, even your certainty. But the power to rebuild is untouchable. And when you rise again, you don't return to who you were. You become something greater, something truer, something unstoppable. I wasn't Theodore's protege anymore. I wasn't Richard's victim. I was an architect of buildings, yes, but also of second chances, of transformation, of the belief that every person deserves a space to grow into their fullest self. And that was the true inheritance Theodore had left me, not the money, not the company, but the unshakable conviction that no matter how far you fall, you can always build again. This time, build something even more extraordinary than what came before.